Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session of Urban Manifesto. This is a big moment for humanity as we face one of the biggest challenges of our lifetime. The most important question to ask as we think about our collective future is how to build a fairer, healthier, and greener future. This pandemic has obviously exposed the deep fractures in our society. The normal that made up our life before COVID was not really working. When we do move towards the road to recovery, let's ignore the instincts to go back to the way things were. In the Urban Manifesto series, we outline the urban agenda for a brave new world where we hope we'll be more inclusive, we'll be more green and more livable. This series hopes to outline some of those ideas. And we bring this to you in partnership with Architecture Foundation, and we are part of the ongoing 100-day studio, and we are honored to welcome that community as well. I'm Prathima Manohar from the Urban Vision from India, and I'm thrilled to bring this discussion to you with my colleague Lucy Bullivant. Lucy?
Welcome everybody to another Urban Manifesto webinar. We are delighted to be focusing on the very important theme of the future of placemaking. We are absolutely delighted that today our two speakers are two real proactive, exceptional experts, leaders in their field. Welcome to Ethan Kent, the co-founder of PlacemakingX, based in New York City, and equally welcome to PK Das, who is a renowned architect activist and founder of PK Das Architects, based in Mumbai. Now, place. Place is a highly resonant word with many elements to its significance. The interrelated significance of all the different aspects of it are too many to discuss here. There's so many books that go into this. But these are all of human value on both a tangible and an intangible dimension or level, amongst them being livability, facility, connectivity, adaptability, accessibility, inclusivity, locality, memories, narrative, and soul. Now, it is undeniable that there remain very many serious blocks to the systemic changes that are needed in every society across the world to realize more places that would embody these qualities and capacities. So with Urban Manifesto as part of our mandate, and you will notice if you've been following us every single week, and we commit to doing this at regular intervals in the future every Tuesday, we're continuing to focus as a part of what we do on the fast track, tactical urbanist side of placemaking. The strategies that have really come to the fore, in many cases due to the almighty efforts of local municipalities and third sector organizations and retailers now, as things in some parts of the world start to open up a little bit. During this pandemic, so for example, to improve the streets for cyclists and for pedestrians to improve safety, and also to strengthen community support networks. Now, these measures, they really demonstrate that adaptations to place can be done well, and they can be done at speed. It also begs the question of what other aspects of placemaking can be accelerated at this time and in the future as we transition into a new era. So we're looking at the centrality of placemaking as a vital multidisciplinary practice. And a key element of that we want to tease out a little bit as a question during this webinar is how citizens and stakeholders can further be empowered to collaborate. And a key part of that is also how they can themselves become prime movers and thereby engender a greater sense of a new and a fresh sense of agency in terms of placemaking. So before we turn to Ethan and PK to present their respective personal manifestos, we must ask, as we do every week, our speakers, how have you been managing under lockdown? Ethan?
So I'll go ahead. Sure. First of all, I want to say it's really good to be with you all, and people I've learned from, been inspired from, and been friends with for a long time. This is help. These types of conversations have definitely helped through lockdown. I have, it's obviously in New York, it's been a challenge, but also a beautiful time in ways to step back and realize what's important to us and how many things still do work in this challenging time. I've also been lucky to get out of the city right now at my mother's house here in Rhode Island, and feeling very lucky. But been trying to connect with friends all around the world, and that are all learning together and thinking deeper, thinking bigger about what we need to do, what we can do. So looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. How about you, PK?
Well, I would say I'm not doing very well, actually, because
that's okay. I'm sorry to hear.
One of the big losses probably is not being able to meet people. That's where we draw our energies and ideas from. Meeting people, talking to them, and sharing, and talking about common interests and about our cities, and that's just happening through talks like this, through Zoom and other medium. But being across each other, looking at each other's face, feeling one another's pain and joy and sorrows, that's missing. So that's sort of not giving me enough energy and strength and the power to think critically. That's my loss. That's why I'm not doing too well.
I totally relate to that. There's nothing like human contact in a one-to-one physical sense. Technology has really served us pretty well so far, and we don't know how much longer we're going on for. But here in the here and now, let's turn to your personal manifestos. So who's going to go first? Toss a coin.
Well, Ethan, go ahead.
Great, very nice.
Oh, those are my slides.
You have to go first, PK. Now you have to.
Okay, that's not my first slide. Okay. Well, one of the can you go to the first slide, Prathima, which is the map? That's right. Well, one of the just three things, as I've been told to cite as being most important. But let me clarify: these are not my personal manifestos or objectives. These are our collective interests through various movements of citizens and people in the city of Mumbai and elsewhere in the world. The very first thing that I'm really deeply concerned about is our environment and the whole idea of being able to build with nature. I think that has to be the predominant theme upon which we must, form our work and ideas and actions. It's very, very important, critical at this stage of the kind of climate change effects that we are now kind of experiencing. The climate change effects are pandemic. It's endemic, it's pandemic, whatever you call it. And it's killing over 300 to 400,000 people every year around the world. So, in many ways, it's a much bigger pandemic than the COVID-19. So that's really the central objective of my thinking and work. The second, which is to me really very, very important, is building relationships between people and collectively with nature, and both of which have diminished over the years. People no more engage in dialogue with each other. Democratic space has been shrinking as we've been going by and expanding our cities. and undertaking major development works. And we need to get back to building these relationships. But what's very important is to collectively build our relationship with nature, with natural areas and natural elements, for they would have to form the idea of our development plans. In fact, the development plans would have to be based on the ideas of conservation, reinvigoration, and expansion of natural areas and elements. The third, maybe the second slide you could show in that is, the whole question of, this is a poster for public campaign in a neighborhood of Mumbai, which really means that you bring about, there's a Juhugiri Pyar Se, means actually it's a coercive action that you need to sort of take collectively to bring about change, but with a bit of love. I mean, that's the translation of Hindi to English. But this is a neighborhood map, and it shows how we are proposing to network and connect various natural areas of the place. And what's significant about networking public spaces is the networking of people. And that's the central idea. So people and spaces and nature, they really form the three aspects that are significantly, that must significantly influence the idea of public spaces and the making of public spaces. The next slide, if you can just go to, is the idea of a public campaign, running public campaigns, which I talked about through the poster, but much more through newspapers, through radio, through television, large public campaigns to build public knowledge and to be able to exchange and disseminate knowledge about nature. In which one of the first things that I really missed out in the first slide was really the process of mapping. And we cannot anymore rely upon data which is being thrown at us time and again by our governments. At least in India, we've never relied on this. They have most often bluffed. We need to have people's data. And mapping is a social and political process and democratization of data. So really, that's the second thing that I'm talking about. And the third really is to connect all of that, the mapping process, building with nature, building relationships, into finally being able to re-envision our cities. We need to go through this massive exercise and dialogue of re-envisioning our cities through public spaces movements, of projects that are scalable to cities, to city levels, of about integration of cities which are otherwise being broken down into disparate fragments through a number of ways, whether it's the caste differences or the religion differences or the faith or whatever you say, or the gender differences and so on and so forth. We are being broken down gradually into our disparate fragments. But we need to put them together. We need to piece the cities together. And this integration and scalability through projects is really, in a sense, a way forward. So to conclude my 3 points, I would sort of say what I've learned through my experiences here in the city of the past 40 years is really to intervene, to be able to intervene in the ongoing processes of exclusivity, of exclusive developments, or rather exclusion of more and more people as we go by through our programs of development. Movements for expansion of public spaces. So I'm not just talking about conservation, restoration, but I'm also talking about expansion of public spaces. For public spaces are sharply declining and shrinking over time. And therefore, we need these movements for expansion of public spaces, to me, is an incredible democratic means for the achievement of sustainable social and environmental change. Indeed, cities that are sustainable. Thank you. I just missed out 2 quick slides to talk about this change. Could you just, Prathima, run through those 3 slides very quickly? In short, to say that we bring the next 3 slides, that really what demonstrates what, no, just move forward, please, to the last 3 slides, yeah. Just after this, maybe. Yes, so these are 3 projects in Mumbai, in 3 different neighborhoods. You can move to the second and the third. And essentially the point I'm making through here is that through intervention and through collective neighborhood intervention, we demonstrate social and environmental change. Prathima, the next slide, please. And these places have indeed changed significantly. So not only people have come together, but they engage in the management of these spaces, they define urban space, they manage these urban areas, and compel our governments and municipal corporations to function in a certain way that is participatory. Yeah, the third slide. I think that's all about it. Thank you. I think I've exceeded my time of 3 minutes.
Bravo, bravo. That's magnificent manifesto. It covers the macro to the micro with holistic and non-piecemeal strategies. Wonderful. Thank you very much. How about, so now Ethan's personal manifesto.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you guys. This is fun to get to be a part of, partly because really my new role is, again, learning from and highlighting the role of people like you all with PlacemakingX. And so our manifesto is to create a movement of placemaking leaders that are really turning upside down the shaping of cities, to start with people and public spaces, to start with the messages that PK just brought to you, and the work, the body of work that he's developed, and but connecting people all over the world that are doing this similar work. But first of all, though, to mention you all, because Prathima is someone I've known for many years, and has visited us in New York many times. I've gotten to be a part of a conference in Mumbai, that she organized, and she's had many wonderful study tours in New York and other parts of the world that are connecting leaders in New York. I've been connected to people in New York through her and elsewhere. And so it's this networked learning that you all embody and really lead on better than anybody, that I think is the type of leadership and change that needs to occur, and we're designing PlacemakingX on. In Lucy's case, your book Recoded City, and participatory placemaking highlighted amazing models and organizations for placemaking around the world that we need to keep learning from. The problem is that everyone's doing this alone. Often we're learning in isolation, and now is the challenge. And through these new technologies and these efforts to gather online in these ways, we can accelerate the learning, the networking, the collective action and messaging that your book Recoded City really helped get started, and we need to continue to build on that. And of course, with PK, we've actually done a lot of this together. That slide you're showing of all the different conferences, PK's been to, I think, more than anyone, more than any of those. So we're trying to build now networks, regional networks. We have about 14 regional placemaking networks that have emerged out of some of these conferences. One of the more recent ones is Placemaking India that Prathima's really helped lead, and PK's been part of. There was a placemaking weekend in Pune in 2019, and Prathima's been helping to plan hopefully a conference in this December in your community. If this happens, but maybe we can do it virtually if it doesn't happen physically. But sort of the larger mission of PlacemakingX is really to be a network of the leaders accelerating placemaking globally, and realizing that every part of the world has strengths in some ways, weaknesses in others, and we see place as this convergence force, as this means through which we can bring together the best of many different disciplines, sectors, advocates. It creates a little humility that we all lot, but the learning curve is steep. But also the best way to create the systemic change necessary is to use the disruptive power of place to ground us in our communities, in common sense, in the debates that inevitably occur around public space. And certainly, we're all familiar with many of the really strong debates around technology right now, and India has been a big part of the embracing smart cities in positive ways, but obviously also in the siloed sort of top-down solution-oriented approach that limits it. And we think a lot of these technologies need to be applied faster. But if we're applying them in a way that's just place-sensitive, not place-led, we're limiting the impact and limiting the potential application of them. Or other, areas. Equity, obviously, inclusion are now rightfully and front and center in many people's minds. We need to leverage places and the debates around public space to really go deeper around the histories, the structural racism that they have come out of and they are perpetuating in many ways. Place and placemaking can be used to change these. It can also be used to perpetuate them, unfortunately, if we don't ask deep enough questions and really uncover the histories of oppression and pain that are embodied in many ways in the public realm. So how public space can and placemaking at every scale, whether in front of our homes, citywide, globally, nationally, we need to make sure we're not just perpetuating existing systems, but looking for systemic change, looking for new models of place-led governance, financing, participation, design. All the disciplines need to be challenged to go further. The progressive wings of most disciplines are what we call place sensitive at best. They're saying they're telling the communities, we got this. We understand natural issues and historic, cultural, equity issues, and they're designing in response to them. That's not enough. To really utilize the skills of these disciplines and their ideas, we need to empower, challenge communities to lead and to put the role of the expert in service of communities. We need to amplify the models that are doing this. I think that's the way these ideas are going to go viral. And it's, and so public space is not just about set of design solutions. It's really the human outcomes. It's the social outcomes that PK was saying, we miss, that really makes these ideas go viral. The joy that public space can bring is what ultimately will help communities outcompete fractured places that are being, where the dominant model is to extract shared value from the public realm, which unfortunately is the most globalized development patterns and cultures. It's still a very extractive model of development, from the extraction from the street, from the consumer, very consumeristic. We need to show the places where there's the most joy, the most happiness, the most equality. Those are the places that create the most shared value and the most and create private value and private wealth. And so lastly, we need to accelerate impact. We can't just have a bunch of one-off great successes and leaders, but we need to empower, facilitate, connect people doing this all over the world. Everyone needs to be a placemaking leader, a facilitator, a connector. We can't just stay within our disciplines, our silos, our top-down government models. We need to leverage all those great institutions and build from them. But ultimately, we need more power and capacity at the community scale, at the place scale, to be partners in driving change, in learning, and action. So that's our goal. We invite everyone to be part of PlacemakingX to help figure this out with us. We need to reach out to new partners, new disciplines, and that's what Placemaking India is doing, and many other regional networks around the world are leading this conversation. So looking forward to discussing with you how we can best work together to address this, to move this agenda forward. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for encapsulating all the related themes of PlacemakingX in such a short time. I totally agree with you. This point of, and this is something that we spent some time focusing on, and with our Recoded City book, which of course was also, equally based on a lot of live research that myself and my co-author, Thomas Omakora did, but also an awful lot of practical placemaking projects that Thomas did in the preceding years. One thing we spent some time engaging our brains on was this whole relationship of, some things have to grow out of the local. In fact, the majority of things in good placemaking have to emerge and be nurtured from local conditions. So they have to be placemaking solutions that are bespoke or tailored to particular very specific conditions. But at the same time, placemaking has many, many universals. There are universal qualities and capacities that you can draw together as a mass of ideas and strategies. and not getting confused about the difference between the two, I think, is really important. So thank you very much for that. We will now move on to our a friendly interrogation. Prathima and I will take it in turns to give you some very well considered, hopefully well considered questions. So we understand where you're each coming from a little bit better, and our audience can then consider some questions for themselves a little bit further along. So over to you, Prathima.
Yeah, thank you, PK and Ethan, for laying out that agenda, in such a brief time. I think it's the agenda of placemaking is so crucial because the agenda of cities is so crucial, right? Like, I think one of the professors at Howard Kennedy School once said that the greatest challenge of our times is to build better cities. And a focus on place and placemaking has been able to successfully catalyze better urbanism over the last couple of decades, for example. I think while master plans and development plans can take ages, and in our case in Mumbai, we're still trying to figure out what the next development plan is, because it takes a ton of time to develop those policies. Placemaking actually offers a real, immediate, tangible change, and public realm can be such a great way to transform our cities. So, my first question to both of you, and PK, we can start with you, is within the practice of placemaking, can we highlight achievements that have delivered more sustainable, equitable place, where the tools and the frameworks of placemaking has delivered that change that we all desperately seek to achieve at this point in time? And I know in Mumbai you can share your examples of placemaking as well.
Yeah, most certainly. I think examples are very, very important. Examples of change brought about through collective endeavor, through participatory mechanisms, through larger ideas of cities, and the change that we want to bring about, bringing people together, are certainly extremely important to be highlighted and shared. For they speak a lot. The change that you bring about on the ground is forever can be dissected and discussed, and you will find new meanings and new ways forever from them as you go forward. One of the things that I sort of think is that when we are working on placemaking projects, these are not, in an architectural sense, a design project or designed project to its last detail. Because if you package it completely as a product with the last detail, it leaves no space and opportunity for people to engage and change further of a process that has begun. So that's a kind of a irony that many physical planners, architects, and designers do confront and do engage in. I mean, we kind of try to design places, but I think it's the processes, the process which opens up doors and windows for engagement and cross-section of ideas that forever engages to change and evolve those details that are often can be even demolished and rebuilt, can be rejected and accepted. I think that we need to understand that process. And in that process, I think what's very significant is to be able to launch a democratic platform of engagement in which not any individual leader is a hero or an icon. I mean, sorry to say that, Ethan, but I've kind of over the years really been shy about talking about individuals as being champions and heroes. I think we must talk about organizations as icons and heroes and not individuals. I think we need to make a point about that, because what that does is then it brings in many more people to engage, not shy away, be able to open up in these discussions. And I tell you, people, even the most people whom we think as being the most ordinary or not knowledgeable or formally educated, have great ideas to contribute in the making of this collective endeavor towards bringing about change. So yeah, you're right, Prathima, that I think one of our big successes in Mumbai truly has been maybe 35, 40 years back, when we intervened in a particular space along a coastline in Mumbai and forcibly brought about physical change through local area and neighborhood people. And I think that sent huge signals across the city that sparked off many local and neighborhood movements. And I think that's the measure of success. It's really not the design of how the detailing of the stone and the paving and the landscaping and the lighting, which we often overdo, but it's important to be designed well, but surely that's not the end of it all. So what we demonstrate is these processes of collectivization and not of individualization.
Yeah, I think one of Mumbai's most favorite public realms has been delivered through that, with the community, especially the local residents. And you're right, I think we need to highlight the role of institutions and communities as the key kind of player in delivering better cities.
But I'll just leave, if you don't mind, with two questions here, not get into the detail of it from what you're saying. I've always begun to question, when we keep saying community and people, who, which community, which people? Because often people engage in exclusive communities. They sort of exclude many other people. There's always this exclusivity process. So we have to be extremely careful how we democratize and make it inclusive. Again, local can be very dangerous very often. But being able to make that local and relate it to the city and to the global becomes again very critical. Otherwise, movements can die by its own, its own limitations of thinking and selfishness. We have to relate. We have to scale up those ideas and be able to relate to global questions. For example, the climate change issue. I think I've been sort of just leaving these two questions for further discussion of the criticality of understanding of local and community.
Ethan, would you like to take that on? You've been an evangelist and supporter of placemakers all over the world. In a way, you incubated the global placemaking movement. So if we were to outline the achievements of this movement to deliver more equitable, inclusive, sustainable urban living, can we showcase some of them? Would you be able to highlight some examples?
Sure. Yeah, that's a challenging, fun question. So, I mean, in many ways, obviously, we have, the impact has been small. It's been challenging. We haven't had enough impact, and that's why we're sort of designing PlacemakingX to figure out a model for broader impact. The learning though has been incredible. I mean, one thing I think we've done really well is we've found amazing people and stories around the world of people doing this work, and as you said, there's a lot of common principles, common learning between them, and sort of figuring out these shared principles. One of the first of which really is that the community is the expert, and we need to support them, respect them in their expertise, draw it out further, build their capacity more. And certainly that the individual stories that I've been lucky to get to know or get to be involved with a little bit, that's the overwhelming examples, like just like PK says, they're more of a platform for spaces. It's more about the process. It's more about the how people are allowed to shape and create ownership over these spaces, and the management and ongoing programming and reinvention of these spaces. And certainly, as Lucy pointed out, if any one user group dominates it, it's a it can be problematic. It can be a form of privatization of control, and it's a constant discussion around that. So how how we're always, it's an ongoing question of always learning, questioning, challenging. No project is finished, no project is perfect, and of course we need to go deeper now. Is a lot of the global conversation on equity and inclusion is finally uncovering in a deeper way. So the learning needs to be grounded in these case studies. We need to keep sharing the most exciting case studies around the world. PKs are up there. I'm familiar with a lot of ones in New York that you've brought the developers from Maharashtra state to New York to see Bryant Park and Rockefeller Center, and some of the public plazas like Times Square. Some of the think projects I've gotten to be involved with in New York City. And of course, there's good pushback on how they all need to be better and more respectful of a whole range of different factors and populations as well. So let's network the conversation and the learning and realize and create more humility amongst all the leaders. But we do need leaders to be sort of network hubs like you all are to connect and grow and build this conversation, make sure it respects the past, the learning, the elders, but opens up to bigger questions and new energy, new learning as well.
Yeah, I think I love those two kind of common themes that you both had. One is PK talking about how institutions and community networks are the hero, and you've always had that theme of community being the expert, and I think that's a crucial kind of approach to thinking about building better urban commons. Lucy?
Yes, this is so far fascinating. I've got a question concerning how community groups can make further headway in contexts where their local municipalities are perhaps just not open to the kind of localist change that they're having challenges seeing with the same eyes. I mean, I'm working on a placemaking project with one of my collaborators, the Norwegian architect Alex Farunes in Norway, in a outer area of Oslo, and we are with a group of architects and artists facilitating the retrofitting of an old kindergarten, a disused kindergarten, into a community house, as they call it, community center, a small one. And the municipality has got so fired up. For many, many years, they were thinking of doing something more, but just through the bringing together of new people, new community members taking more action, we really have found a way to unblock, let's say, sort of an impasse that had at times stopped the creation of community facilities in areas, in a neighborhood which was, monoculture, a neighborhood of residences. So what advice would you give to community groups who are finding that they, all the blocks I mentioned at the outset are impeding any progress? Are there more lateral ways of thinking about placemaking projects?
PK, I can start on that. Certainly, yeah, a lot of, I think placemaking has started from different sectors in different parts of the world. And, in the US, it has been started more from the community perspective, perhaps, more philanthropic involvement, more grassroots engagement, more leadership from Main Street organizations or business improvement districts. Where I think of it in the UK and perhaps Norway as well, it's been more, there's been lots of innovation and great research and models more from the disciplines or from government. That's a broad generalization perhaps, but and so we have learned a lot about what community-driven placemaking needs to look like, and how, when there isn't leadership from other sectors, how the community can lead. And it often does start with the short-term, low-cost experiments that we call lighter, quicker, cheaper efforts, and they can be sanctioned or not. It's the testing, the building momentum, the realizing, the realization of the expertise and skills and within a community. And again, the process is most important of how people get there. The learning and debate that occurs from making mistakes, from having some conflict around public spaces. But obviously, right now we're in this era where we've sort of receded inside of our homes, and in many cases, and reflected on what's important to us in our communities and in our public realm. But we're also now rethinking how are we going to reinvent our relationship to our communities, to our public spaces, at a very local level. And and I think we've also rediscovered what's most important to us, and how our communities are our homes, their culture and identity of the public realm, and how do we reconnect with that? How do we recreate it? How do we challenge it? And the ways that the economic necessity that's occurring to support retail, street vendors, other public uses, health, recreation in the public realm is unleashing this time to rethink how can we maximize use of space? How do we who gets to use it? Who's are we letting restaurants use it too much, or in some cases we're not thinking about street vendors enough, and how they can activate public space to make it safe and sustain their livelihoods as well. So this is a time to come together and engage in really dynamic, hard public space placemaking processes for our public, and we're never going to have this opportunity again for quite a long time. And as you said, this traffic's already coming back to the streets. We need to make sure, if we're going to address our biggest challenges, climate change, of equity, of health, we need to drastically repurpose, reinvent how our shared spaces, our streets in particular, are used. And it really is communities. It's at the local level that's happening. It's like government playing a role in allowing it to happen in some cases, but it's succeeding, and it's being allowed to go further because of the success of communities, of businesses, of actions on the street.
You 100%. How about you, PK?
Well, there are too many questions involved in one question, and
it really is just basically the advice for community groups experiencing setbacks and obstacles in their way.
Yeah, sure. I mean, very clearly, local is the whole idea of local is a bundle of conflicts and contradictions as we unbundle them. And I think that's where the inquiry lies, or the investigation really is to understand the local, because local is not just one cohesive group of people. There are people with varying interests and big diversity and conflicting interests, right? And they, there are rich to the poor, to people who are highly gender biased, people of different age groups with different political leanings, and so on and so forth. So and that's why I keep saying it's a bundle of conflicts and contradictions, and we need to still sort of swim through those conditions. And placemaking, therefore, very often dominated by the middle class or the upper class people in many instances, can reduce to exercises in beautification of places. And it sort of, in many ways, does not then question the need for structural change or contradictions that would inevitably demand significant structural changes. I'm sort of citing certain, issues and limitations and questions which would help us to then sort of make bigger headway. And therefore, we experience that as cities are expanding, we have been sort of producing more and more backyards of filth, of exclusion, of neglect, of abuse, both of people and places. And so the real challenge has been to try and get into those fringes, those peripheries of cities, those areas of exclusion and abuse, to bring about change and to have placemaking as an effort in those areas, in those peripheries of exclusion and the backyards of cities and neighborhoods, where we can build community networks. That's truly challenging to me. And there has been very little effort towards that challenge. I have made many attempts, have not succeeded, or I've succeeded 1 out of 100. And that remains one of the biggest challenges for me in my engagement with public spaces. And finally, I think dealing with municipal corporations and local governments would really truly be possible if we can bring about a unification or a network of these diverse situations and communities. For therein lies the strength to influence decisions that affect our lives, to influence governments and municipal corporations in decisions that they take that affects our lives. And so that's on one hand. On the other hand, Prathima's question of how do you influence municipal corporation or you engage with them, my second answer to that would be that we need to constantly demonstrate and illustrate how each of these local efforts can actually scale up at the level of the city to bring to sort of impact in a much bigger way to what I call is the re-envisioning of cities. For example, if I'm talking about a drain or a filthy drainage, open drainage channel in a neighborhood of Mumbai, what we call are the nallas, very famously in India, then can the interventions in the reinvigoration of the waters and the environments of the nallas relate to the network of water courses and natural streams and water bodies in the entire city. So just an example. And how, therefore, again, going back to my first point that I made, is how to integrate nature and development demands and needs, and how placemaking could really be an effective means to bring about that merger or that integration of questions of environment with the challenges of development. And I would firmly say that the challenge is not really to try and see who wins and how we can overcome the forces of nature, but how we can give space for nature to expand and for the waters to swell and the forests to expand and the pollutions to shrink in the process of development. So it's really the development plans of cities to be must be re-envisioned in completely radically different ways, where we're not talking about projects, but we're talking about environmental change, where we're talking about sustainable development and a more resilient structure of community networks. I think these are some of the big things through which we must not only work with the municipal corporations, but influence them. These paradigm shifts that are critical to our very survival and saving of lives, which I said in the beginning, are being lost in these huge numbers through the climate change pandemic.
I hear you. I mean, and also Placemaking India made a nice comment a little earlier on. The top takeaway from PK Das: let's build organizations, not individuals, as icons. And that would imply also that we approach biodiversity as allies as well. So natural organizations, biodiversity are allies in placemaking, applying a more lateral approach to placemaking issues compared with, the business as usual type of placemaking of the past. So I think, thank you very much for that. Prathima's got another question.
I agree. I think, democracy sometimes becomes about who can scream the loudest, and that can sometimes lead to exclusion, like, PK said. And, if we really have, for our democracies to truly thrive, we need to ensure that the weakest in our societies thrive. And the great mayor of a South American city once said that the sidewalk and public realm is a symbol of democracy. And I think, the state of our, democracy around the world is reflected by that. And one of the big inspirations for the placemaking movement has been Jane Jacobs, and she once famously said that cities have the capability for providing something for everybody only because and only when they're created by everybody. And I think the point that you make, PK, which is how do we get everybody's inputs, the most weakest during the placemaking campaign is probably one of the toughest challenge that all of us around the world face. And if we as a community aim to create more inclusion and equity, how do we achieve it? And how do you amplify frameworks to enable more equity as we create these places? What are the how if we can kind of highlight components that have worked to bring a wider group into the frame, to bring marginalized, weaker segments of the society to participate? Are there ways to do that, and how can we embrace those ideas and amplify them?
Hey, can I take on that question first? Sorry, Ethan.
Okay, no, go for it, please.
Grabbing this opportunity. Prathima has been brilliant because I just missed out a point and she's now brought it up. Well, the answer to that, Prathima, would be, my answer to that would be that, it's very, very, very important for placemaking movements to relate to and network and engage with other democratic rights struggles in the city and world over. For placemaking movements cannot survive on their own. They have to relate to other democratic rights struggles. Right. And it is this building up of larger networks of struggles of people and movements for democracy, for democratization of cities, its assets and property, is really significant. And probably that's the answer to your question, that how do we do it, is to expand our network, not just amongst placemaking organizations across borders, but across multi-sectoral movements. I think this association has to be expanded, and they would enrich each other, both politically and socially, and of course, environmentally. But I think the political lessons are most significant when such movements do network with each other and can expand through that process. And that's really difficult. That's not easy because we speak different languages, mind you. That's yet another fragmentation that is being systematically being promoted, is that each specialist speaks in a different language, which is alien to another community or to another movement. As architect, I would use jargons and languages and thought processes, which nobody else in the communities will understand. And for me to be able to learn that language that communities can understand and participate and contribute actively truly is a challenge to me, not a challenge to the community or to the people in the community or the diversity of people and their thoughts and thinking in the community. So it's really about you at a certain level of how we can liberate ourselves from those exclusive areas and partitions and walls that we built forever through so many different ways, including through our education and exclusive training and skill sets that we often be proud about. But how can we break those barriers and de-barricade our cities? That really is a challenge to me. And that's my answer to your question, Prathima.
Thanks, PK. Ethan?
Yeah, thank you. And inspiring, PK, to hear these perspectives. I totally agree. So yeah, I mean, we think that placemaking need to turn upside down the shaping of cities, but also the shaping of movements. It's a disruptor to the silos, that have each become their own audience in a sense, and you use a rarefied language to often become more and more distant from the communities they're meant to serve. Again, the solutions, the skill sets need to be applied and drawn on more heavily, but we see place as a way to make the shaping of communities more accessible to everyone. And in many ways, I think the focus for public spaces needs to increasingly be on informality and allowing and respecting informality in the shaping of public spaces, in the process, in the use of spaces. We've formalized it, and I think that really reflects the formal culture of design, that PK mentioned, of how we sort of tend to over-design and allow spaces to be rigid. The process has been too rigid as well. In many ways, I think it's people are unpacking colonialism right now, and sort of white culture, white supremacist culture. These are things that really need to be challenged, and they are reflected in the culture of our institutions that are shaping the built environment. Often subconsciously, often they're embedded. But non-white culture is what's actually needed to make public spaces better for everybody in many cases. And certainly in India, how in any city really, how we figure out ways to draw on and support informal communities, informal life, informal workers, even in benefiting from public spaces and contributing to public spaces, is how cities will succeed and fail. Again, it's not just about doing it because it's the right thing to do or because it's a crisis, but it's also fun, joy, comfort, being relaxed, being informal in a public space is also what's going to go viral. It's when it's the happiness that can be created through feeling like you're shaping your space, that you belong in a space, and you can open up in ways that allow you to connect to other people, to bridge difference, to forge networks, to forge communities, to build capacity to take on bigger challenges. The culture change that public space and placemaking can bring about at a small scale that can go viral when people see these joy, when they see the change that can be brought around at a low cost, low scale way. The culture change that is huge. So it's a few small places within cities that the idea of PlacemakingX is you focus on the sort of power of 10 idea. A great place needs at least 10 reasons to be in it. It's the purpose. It's the excuses to spend time in that space. It's not design can play an important role, but usually after the uses, the functions have been decided on by the community. But we need great destinations, and we need to within cities as well that each have 10 places with 10 things to do in it. We need to show places that are markets, that are in low-income communities, that are welcoming and fun. We need, high iconic places as well. We need great waterfronts, like Mumbai's waterfront that PK was involved with, that become the face of the city, and they're continually created and recreated by people's use of those spaces. Public markets, vending, the work of groups like WeGo, and I really do want to say that is sort of the biggest challenge and opportunity for making cities work, and how restaurants now are allowed to use spaces. We need to figure out how also informal vending and can use spaces in ways that contribute to public spaces. On the best streets and the best markets, every user, every customer almost competes to contribute to shared value. Everyone's smiling. It's contagious. The joy is contagious, and that's the antidote to the fear that can pervade and prevent good urbanism, good cities to from succeeding. And now as people can live where they work, as they can invest where they work, they can live anywhere they choose and invest anywhere they choose more than ever. Places that people love, places that people feel welcome in, but feel belonging in, are the ones that are going to succeed most in the future, across income, across culture. So it's all the more important for cities to invite people, to give love to them, to contribute to them, to co-create them, to determine their success going forward. So this is, obviously, we need to keep building these networks and these conversations, and I look forward to doing this with you.
I think, Ethan, you summarized how placemaking can, in a way, bring that interdisciplinary, multifaceted discussion to the table for development. And I think PK earlier on mentioned how, placemaking is really not about design. It's about the process of engaging communities to be the stewards of that place and deliver a place that is important to their ideas and needs. And we have a comment here from Danya Rajagopal, who's speaking about, in India, for example, 70% of our economy is informal, and in cities it's made up of, street hawkers and vegetable vendors. And, how do you create, and often we are creating our, streets without involving these vendors. And obviously that's probably one of the reasons our cities have become so, exclusive and just kind of built for the car. I want to again welcome the amazing community that is joining us from all over the world, as I can see. Please share your questions in the comment box below. We'll try to take some of them for PK and Ethan to answer. But I guess we're quickly running out of time already. This has been a very rich conversation, Lucy.
Yeah, very rich. Do I have time to ask one more? Well, in case anybody's got questions. In fact, what I'm going to do is to build on Daniel Rajagopal's comment, where they said place-based partnership coalition is the most important thing. It brings in care, funding, ownership, maintenance, and safety. So I think the question I wanted to ask is about partnership, but also about governance, because placemaking is really important, but place governance is equally important to make sure that places carry on delivering all of these things, and that they're managed and led in good ways. So what are the one or two innovations that you would like to see in place governance in the next period going forward?
I'd love to take that one. That's in place governance really is my favorite topic, and I think sort of the frontier of change for the placemaking movement. And again, every part of the world is leading on place governance from different perspectives, and also limiting from different perspectives. They're coming at it from strengths, and often those strengths are blocking leadership from other sectors. So looking at it globally, we can start to take innovations from different parts of the world. I work a lot in Australia and New Zealand. They're very progressive from a government perspective. The cities are doing a pretty good job, but they're realizing that they've almost limited or blocked capacity from communities to participate because they're delivering places for them, not with them, and not building their capacity. So there's a lot, because of that, there's a lot of learning on how do you develop place-led models of governance. Business improvement districts, main streets haven't been as strong there because that hasn't been the crisis for them. Sure. But I actually think, some of the fastest growing parts of the world have a lot to learn from places like Australia, not to just copy top-down models of governance, but support, foster, learn from the more informal models of governance that are succeeding in various ways to manage the public realm, to create sort of dialogue process in informal ways. Sometimes we go too far to formal governance and destroy throughout the sort of the informal aspects of it. But that said, I think in all around the world, there's a trajectory towards sort of place governance at the district, community, neighborhood scale that's needed. And we really need to reinvent government democracy from that scale up. It's focusing on shared public spaces and places that enable this governance to emerge in a way that's democratic, grounded in action, practical, and can create the sort of the visible changes that are needed for democracy to keep going. But we need to look at how it's not just about the places; it's about local economies and governance. It's about local financing models, the value capture models. How do we perpetuate, show that investments in shared value can be sustained, support local business and property value to an extent, but at a much higher ratio, support shared value and access for all, support opportunities for livelihoods, for jobs, for sort of, we talk about a healthy city has a full scale from informal to spectrum, from informal to formal, where there's opportunities for entering the job force and moving up. So, we need street vendors need to see how they can formalize slightly, perhaps, and have greater opportunities to grow their business and their economic fortunes. So governance needs to be looked at, holistically, from a participatory perspective, from a financial perspective, and from a development design perspective. How do we create whole new models of place-led development and design that are grounded in and support these governance structures as well.
Brilliant. PK?
Yeah, may I just add on something to this discussion? Yeah. To me, one of the biggest dangers to democratization of governance is privatization. The increased trust towards privatization of public assets, including public spaces. Increasingly, governments world over abdicating their responsibility of beholding public interests and entrusting it to private sector. And that's a huge contradiction to the very idea of collective governance or democratization of governance or engagement of the local population in governance of public spaces. So I keep saying, therefore, this whole movement of public spaces, reclaiming public spaces, is really about a political struggle against privatization, against colonization of public assets, so and so forth. And therefore, we need to keep aligning ourselves with larger democratic rights struggles, including, for example, placemaking movements, being able to relate to and associate with Black Lives Matter. Very significant. It's Black Lives Matter is an issue in every place of the world. And those shades of discrimination and exclusion have to be fought. And privatization is one enormous political weapon. Our neoliberalized governments, through privatization, are kind of, thrusting upon us. So to me, really, we have to be extremely careful when we are talking about governance of public spaces, for we are very, very vulnerable, very subtly vulnerable to handing over public spaces by our governments and our municipal corporations in the name of better maintenance, in the name of beautification, to these private agencies. And so our struggle is against colonization, against discrimination.
Yeah, and Dania makes two very sharp suggestions in addition, which I will flag up because I think we're almost out of time now, which we'll just leave there as very good suggestions. To have social justice evaluation criteria when planning and that's India, but that's also all over the world as well, smart cities. Can we also not make a case for public health and relate it to the funding of public space? Now, that is obviously a huge question of social equality, as the pandemic has revealed so many inequalities. And seeing public space quality through the lens of public health is now more fundamental than ever before. So I'm sorry we didn't have more time for audience questions, but we've engaged, I think, with a few points that have been made very well today. So over to you, Prathima, a little summing up.
Yeah, I think I love the... We need more time to discuss this, but
yeah,
I think...
I said our leaders have talked too much.
Sorry?
Anyway.
No, I think this is an important topic, and it's, it was so nice to hear both of your, perspective. Thank you so much for your leadership and vision in this very important matter. We completely take your points of the need for more intersectionality as we, think about these issues, bring race, gender, economic inequality to the, forefront as we frame our agenda for the future. And PK, I completely get your point. As we go through this, point of great disruption, which a lot of people are calling the Great Reset. The world, obviously the world, the normal before COVID did not work, even from an economic perspective. So hopefully the other end of the tunnel post this pandemic, hopefully will be capitalism with a heart. And hopefully we can see governments using the energy of the private sector to deliver more social capital. And it's so nice to have both of you lay out those very important agenda for all of us. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I also want to say thanks to all the amazing community that joins us every Tuesday. Please join us next week as well. We are going to be discussing another important topic, which is the future of development. We are going to host this every Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. BST, 5:30 p.m. CEST, 9 p.m. IST, and 11:30 a.m. EST. So I hope we can convene this global meeting of the minds and actually develop a detailed manifesto for the future of cities, because I guess it's crucial to future of us as human civilization. So thank you again. Have a great day, all of you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks. It's